Welcome back to Ask Dan Anything, and today we're going to have a little video for Brett, who's one of the BROJO ambassadors here in Auckland. He's got a question around trying to help others through a coaching technique that actually applies to anyone having a conversation that they wish to go, they wish to go deeper and be more truthful. So here's what Brett says. One thing I'd like to know is how to get a more accurate picture of what is going on for someone. Sometimes the words that come out of my mouth and the stories I tell are not always true or an accurate reflection of my experience. And it's not that I'm intending to be honest, but they are just an emotional reaction to something, and I'm sure it's the same for others. I want to know how to ask the right questions to dig deeper. So Brett's actually brought up something that's really common for all of us, and that is when we react, when we say something, especially in the height of an emotional turmoil, conflict, or passionate conversation. What comes out isn't really the truth. It isn't accurate as to what we're thinking and feeling. And sometimes it's a strategic use of words to try and get a reaction from the person. And other times it's just the best we could do with what we were feeling and impulsively, spontaneously expressing. So this is a huge one that creates massive conflicts between people because we get attached to the content of the words. We believe the content is an accurate representation of what someone's saying, and often that means it's something we'll take personally or something we'll misunderstand. You'll see this in arguments between couples. One person will say something like, "Oh, you never do the dishes," and so the other person will respond with the times they did the dishes and how important the dishes are. They're all focused on what the person said rather than hearing the true story underneath it. And the person saying you should have done the dishes isn't really sure if that's their problem or not. They're just blurting out the first thing that came to their mind. And later on they go, why do I even care about the dishes? Why did I say that? The key here, and this is in all conversations you have with anyone, is very rare for somebody to speak rationally and logically. You might see it in higher level debates. You might see it with psychopaths or people high on the Asperger's spectrum. But most people, their rationality and their logic gets painted with emotion. And so what ends up coming out of their mouth or being written down by them is not a completely cold representation of the truth. It's the truth mixed up with some amount of feeling as well. And when things get heightened, it's very little truth and a lot of feeling. So one of the ways to look at this is they are actually being truthful, but in an abstract way. Like abstract art represents something it doesn't look anything like. Quite often people speak in this way. The deeper issue is the words are representing ideas. The words themselves are almost irrelevant, they're just clues. Think of it as a series of clues rather than facts. When somebody's expressing themselves, they're giving you threads you can pull on to go deeper. But the things they're giving you aren't the truth itself. You need to let go of the content, especially when you're in an argument with someone or you're debating something. If they say blah, 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 and there's this factor, and you start addressing each and every one of those factors, you'll get nowhere because that's not what they're really talking about. I like to think of it like a movie. Let's say you took, say something like The Matrix. In the movie you see people fighting and there's robots and whatever, but that's not actually the content of the movie. That's the content of the movie, but that's not actually the theme and the morals. Deeper than that, we've got themes on self-development, you've got morals about control and power, you've got all this deeper stuff happening that nobody actually speaks directly to very often in the movie. They just work around it. It's represented by the guys being plugged into machines or by Agent Smith as a character or whatever. These themes are represented indirectly, and this is how a lot of people speak. So when someone starts talking to you about something, imagine they're showing you a movie, and your job is to try and figure out what this movie's actually about underneath the content. In terms of doing this practically, one of the first things you can do is ask them to define their words. Now, language can be very tricky because we have our own meanings for words in any given context, and they'll have theirs, and so often theirs are different. So when somebody says, "You never do the dishes," the first word you've got to ask yourself is, what do you mean by never? Because for me, never means not once ever in history. And I know that you know I've done them, so never must mean something else for you. What do you mean by never? Defining the key words that somebody brings up is a huge... It can do all the work for you. What do you mean when you say good? What do you mean when you say bad? When you say you're angry, what do you mean by anger? What are you feeling? What do you mean when you say? Digging into the words, assuming that every piece of content they give you needs to go deeper before you'll find the truth. That all the words they've given you to start off with are essentially a form of lying. They don't mean to lie, they're not trying to deceive you, it's just the best they could come up with at the time. And if you believe what they come up with at the time, then you're a sucker. You've fallen for the same trick they fell for. They believe the words in their head. You've got to be smarter than that. You've got to dig deeper. What do you mean by these words? And keep doing that until the whole thing makes sense to both of you. The next thing you can do is simply ask, why do you say this? So a lot of people will say what they say and they think they have a reason for saying it, but as soon as you ask, why do you say that, a deeper meaning comes out. You never do the dishes. Why do you say that? Because I'm angry with you. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. The dishes already don't matter. Now it's about the anger. Where's this anger coming from? Why do you say anger? What do you mean by anger? And you keep digging, and you keep digging. The key concept, the first, second, and third thing that somebody says is always a lie. You have to dig at least 3 levels deep before you get anywhere in an emotional conflict. And you can even ask the basic question of, what do you really mean? When you say that, what do you really mean? You play this naive inquirer. It's called Socratic Questioning. You ask why. What do you mean? Until it makes sense to you, to both of you. The key here is understanding it will make sense to you straight away because you'll be attached to the content. Now, if you can convince yourself, wait, the content isn't what it really means, then it won't make sense to you, and you have to dig to find that sense. So ultimately, the key here is just to dig. Is whatever somebody says, dig deeper. Pick at the words, pick at the underlying meaning, make assumptions about what you think they're trying to say, get them to challenge those assumptions, dig back and forth, and you'll start with a conversation of, you never do the dishes, down to a conversation of, I'm insecure about being unloved, which has nothing to do with the dishes. Right? That's the kind of level you want to get to. Or I'm afraid I'm going to lose you. Or I feel like you're not paying attention to me anymore. And that's the real conversation to have. So Brett, I hope that helps. And for those of you who get into emotional conflicts and relationships often, this is probably why. Let go of the content, dig deeper until you find the real meaning. Powerfully use the value of curiosity. You can get heaps of tools and techniques around how to do this in my book, Nothing to Lose. That's on Amazon there. Send your questions through to Ask Dan Anything, dan@brojo.co.nz, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'll see you next time. Cheerio.